Welcome back to Passionate World Radio Talk Network. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And today we have a very special guest with us on Cool Your Heels. He's a doctor and our target specifically obesity with older and younger people. Doesn't matter where you fall on the spectrum. If you're overweight, this gentleman can help you. I am going to let him introduce his name. Otherwise, everybody knows what a great job I do in mispronunciation. So could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lillian, for having me on your show. Well, I'm Dr. Avishkar Sabharwal, and I am a board certified physician in internal medicine, obesity medicine, and lifestyle medicine. And really, obesity medicine and lifestyle medicine are my passion, and I really enjoy, learning more about it and having it as a part of my practice.
So please tell the audience what got you started or motivated to specialize in obesity medication, or excuse me, obesity medicine, because not too many doctors really, they sort of pay lip service to it. They look at their patients, say, you're overweight, go lose weight. And buy those diet pills because they're not going to help you.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I used to be like that. And the reason why I actually started all of this journey with obesity medicine was because I myself have suffered from obesity. And the reason why I say suffered is because obesity is a chronic disease and we recognize it as such. And it's important to understand that while we say that it's a lifestyle disease, but it's much more than that. So when you say that something's a lifestyle disease, you're basically implying that you just change your lifestyle and that's the end of it. Well, that's a part of the story, but not the whole thing. And what happened was so I'm trained both in India and in the US in internal medicine. And then I kind of trained in obesity medicine and so got certified in obesity medicine and lifestyle medicine. So in India, I had actually reached my heaviest weight after my residency in internal medicine. And I decided I had to do something about it. And my lifestyle was horrible. Like I'm sure a lot of doctors would resonate with this in their residency when it's super busy. People don't have the healthiest lifestyle. And what happened was I decided I had to change something. So I changed my lifestyle a bit to make it healthier. And it worked for me. It worked great for me, actually. So I said to myself, I need to do something, about this. I need to know more about this. And I just happened to Google obesity medicine. I did not know that it existed as a field. It did not know that it existed as a specialty. So what I found was that obesity medicine is a specialty in the U.S. and you have to be trained in the U.S. to specialize in obesity medicine. Um, I At that point in time I didn't plan on coming to the U.S., but then it so happened that I came to the U.S. and I did my residency here. Once I was board certified in obesity in internal medicine, I decided to get the certification in obesity medicine as well because this has been my passion throughout. So when I started my certification process with this, I was just amazed at the amount of research that's available out there. And I was also equally amazed at the fact that how little I knew despite having studied medicine in two separate countries. So then I thought to myself, well, if I don't know about obesity after having done my residency twice over in internal medicine and having read the right books, I can only imagine what people know about it. And that led me to start my podcast called Decoding Obesity, where I'm just giving evidence-based information sprinkled with a few inspirational stories so that people can get the right information they need. And the goal really is to get people the information that they can take to their primary care physicians and have a conversation about it.
It's difficult because a lot of doctors really, they look at weight as one of these overall things. They don't look at it as an illness. It took them a long time to recognize that alcohol was an illness and that it was passed down from generation to generation. And if your parents were alcoholics, chances were you or your sister or your brother was also going to be an alcoholic. And then unless it was treated at the root, chances were it was going to keep on repeating itself. And to hear that obesity is also a sickness or an illness brought on by the genes, that if a parent is overweight, they weigh 400 or 500 pounds, chances are that their offspring will also follow the same pattern and wind up overweight themselves. So that's good to know. And I also know that there's not really a lot of medical science where when your doctor looks at you and say your BMI is too high, and you go, BMI, what the hell is that? And you need to lose weight, and the doctor sitting in front of you weighs 200 stone or something, you have to kind of wonder, well, why is he calling me fat? He's no spring chicken. And you really do have doubt. So when you advise people to go and talk to their doctor, what are some of the words or verbs that you suggest they use to make sure that the doctor really understands what they're asking of them? Because nutrition is not taught all that much. I understand doctors get one course on it, and that's about it.
That's true. So so obesity is a complex situation. It's much more than calories in, calories out. I think the first conversation that people usually end up having with themselves, with their colleagues, with their friends, with their families, with regards to obesity, or even with their doctors is, how many calories should I take? I think that's a part of the story. I don't think that's the whole story because there are other modalities that are available and there are other things that may be contributing to obesity. So some things that I talk about are, things like I've done episodes on intermittent fasting, whether that's a good approach for you or not, about different aspects. For example, I've done an episode on sleep, whether that's important or not. There are certain things, certain other diseases that can have obesity as a manifestation. For example, binge eating disorder. It's a separate psychiatric disorder. One of the manifestations of that is obesity. Now, treating the obesity there may not necessarily take care of the binge eating disorder. So actually treating that binge eating disorder might be more important because once you treat that, that might help greatly with obesity. So there's a lot more to this. And that's what I try to do with my podcast is kind of try and give people information about different aspects of it to see if anything resonates with them. And say, for example, improper sleep resonates with somebody. They say, well, I'm not getting enough sleep, or I'm a graveyard shift worker. Then that may be a conversation to have with their physician. Well, do you think what should be the right way I should sleep? Or somebody might say that may not know that they have obstructive sleep apnea, because this is one of those diagnoses that's not necessarily caught right at the outset. And most commonly people will have a lot of fatigue to go along with that. But once you kind of recognize these symptoms, you can start having that conversation with your physician and ask them, do you think I should be tested for this because these are the symptoms that I've been having? Or do you think this thing will work for me? I, of course, do not give any medical advice on my podcast because really everything in obesity, it's not a one size fits all. Just like anything in medicine, just like any disease, it's not one size fits all. So it's not that what I say will be exactly appropriate for the person who's listening to my podcast. But it's about getting that conversation started so that you can have your primary care physician be by your side to make the right medical decision for you. These are just talking points to take with you to your primary care's office. Now, Lillian, one thing I want to point about the genes part that you mentioned, it's interesting that you mentioned that it's genes. So the way we look at it is that yes, genes do play a role in it, but I think it's largely our environment that drives it. So definitely genetics can predispose people to having obesity, but that predisposition does not necessarily mean that it's only the genes. There are very rare forms of obesity which are purely genetic, and they're exceedingly rare. The most common obesity that we see around us is predominantly because of the environmental changes that have happened over the last few decades.
So the people, for example, they have two shows, two sisters who total over 1,100 pounds, and then they have another show about 600 pounds. How does that type of exposure where they're actually getting attention because they're that heavy. And therefore, because they're that heavy, they've gotten stardom qualities, we'll put it that way. How do you try to tell people that's not really where you want to go or end up at that high a weight?
Well, I think it's important to understand that, keeping the stardom aside, your body is going to be with you for the rest of your life. The stardom may or may not be, right? And being at a healthy weight is very important for your health because obesity, we know, is associated with a ton of diseases. Any disease, you name it, and it's associated with obesity, from starting from depression, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, high blood pressure, obstructive sleep apnea, you name it, asthma gets worse. You get infertility, you get PCOS. I mean, you name it, and it's associated with obesity in one way or the other. So, stardom aside, I think it's important to realize that you need to be at a healthy weight so that you're healthy because you're going to be carrying your body for the rest of your life, and you know that's why it's important. But the other thing I want to say is that we do talk about stardom, and we do talk about these people who are suffering from obesity and are at such a high weight. I think the way I look at it is that I don't think anybody intentionally wants, or most of the people do not intentionally want to be at that weight. They ended up at that weight because of certain reasons, certain circumstances, certain situations, certain other pathologies that have been going on within their body that cause them to reach to that weight. So I don't necessarily see that would be having that weight was not the goal for most of the people that are out there.
So if you're going to say to yourself, yes, I'm an alcoholic, and this is what I'm going to do to stop drinking, stop myself from drinking myself to death. I've certainly seen that happen, or drinking myself to oblivion. What does somebody who's very obese say to themselves should they decide and admit to themselves, yes, I could use to stand 200 or 300 pounds? What kind of steps can they do in order to initiate such a change?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that I say, and I've said this on my podcast often, is that it's not about the blame, because it's very easy to blame, say, the society, or very easy for people to blame you for your obesity. Very easy for even for some physicians to blame you for your obesity, that you're at fault. It's a lifestyle disease, and you're not eating right, and it's very easy. But what ends up happening is that once either somebody blames you, or you blame someone, or you blame the circumstances, whatever have you, it creates a wall, it creates a barrier, and that prevents you from progressing further. The way I look at it is, just disregard the blame. It doesn't matter who is to blame. The fact of the matter is that you have that current physical body that you're in, and I think it's important to take the responsibility of that body. When I say responsibility, when I say that you have to take the responsibility for the body that you have, it just means that it automatically gives you a sense of a want to do something, a desire to do something to make it a better self, or make that a better body. And it's not going to be an overnight process. It's going to take some time. So really understanding that you are going to be the one who's responsible for your body, for your health, is the first step I think that anybody needs to take, because till you are ready to take that next step, I don't think anybody, and I don't think the best medicines can help anyone.
So, do you think then it's a mental health issue that once they acknowledge they are the ones who got themselves where they are, and they are the ones who are going to get themselves to where they should be, they give themselves permission to admit they just blew it with their body, if you want to put it that way. Do you think it's a good idea then for them to start talking with a therapist of how? Because from what I'm gathering from what you're saying is if you don't fix the issues that created the problem for you to start overeating in the first place, then going on a rigid diet or taking pills or even having the gastro bypass surgery is not going to help you unless you can deal with the issues that got you where you are.
No, I think you need to deal with the issues that got you where you are, and we need to unravel those issues, because Sometimes they can be very heavy emotional issues that go along with that. But like I said, it's not about blaming yourself. I don't think that's where the journey should start. I don't think, I think it should start at disregarding who is to blame for this. I think that's where it should start. Whether it's yourself, it's not about admitting to yourself that, okay, I am the one who's to blame for this, or it's the environment that is to blame for this, or it is XYZ who's to blame for this. It has to be an inquisitive journey where you try and find out, okay, I'm here, where do I go from here, rather than going back and looking at, okay, this is the reason, this is the person who's to blame for that, because that takes your emotions in a completely different direction, and that's not constructive. But yes, a lot of times there are a lot of other complicated underlying emotional issues, psychological issues that may lead to people eating more or gaining weight, whatever have you. Sometimes it's even medications that can cause it. We
Oh
know
yeah,
that for a fact.
yes, prednisone is a big weight gainer
Yeah.
for anybody, whether you want to put it on or not.
Yeah.
It's the steroids just
Yeah.
add
Steroids,
on down.
insulin. Yeah. So even so, you may be emotionally perfectly fine, but you're on steroids for any other inflammatory disorder, or you're on insulin for diabetes, you're going to gain the weight. So it's not necessary to kind of have an emotional thing. It's not just an emotional issue or a psychological issue, obesity. It's a physiological process that goes on within the body because of various changes that occur. But what causes it can be very different. It may be because of, say, emotional eating. It may be because of a psychiatric disorder like binge eating disorder. It may be because you're on certain medications. It may be very rarely because of the genes. And so there are a lot of other things that go into this that we need to kind of unravel. And, it's like peeling the layers of the onion and trying to figure out what the core is.
So once you have decided to stop blaming yourself and you want to start shedding those pounds, what do you do? I know a lot of people turn to the popular diets that are out there that are advertised on TV. A lot of them have, with permission from their doctor, the bypass surgery. But I understand that if you don't follow the diet or the exercise programs that they put out there for you, you can just gain back the weight all over again.
That is
So,
true.
what does a person do if they want to be serious? How do they go about it?
So yeah, so the next thing is to, if your primary care physician is not able to provide you with the right help, and sometimes that can happen. I'm not blaming any physicians for that. Sometimes it does happen. I would say seek the help of somebody who specializes in obesity medicine, because then you can start getting the right help. There are a lot of fad diets, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because actually there was a study called the A to Z trial, which looked at different diets to see which one sort of works best. And it's really not about the diet that you're on, it's about consistency and maintaining that. Because what ends up happening is you're going to be trying something for some time, and then once you stop trying it, you're going to get the weight back, whether it's a diet, whether it's a medication, whether it's whatever. So it's important to understand that it has to be something that you can sustain. So, somebody may be on a, say, for example, a carnivore diet, but they're not able to sustain it. And so there's no point in doing that. Again, I'm not suggesting that somebody should go on a specifically on a carnivore diet,
Right. I
or
understand
or
what
or
you're saying,
a, or
but
a whole
there,
food plant
there
based
are
diet.
a million diets out
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and,
So I'm not suggesting
and
either way.
people say, "Well, this worked for me, so it's going to work for you." But that's
Right.
not right. It doesn't work for
Yeah.
everybody. I know
Right.
that because my system gets used to what I'm doing, and then
Exactly.
it's a whole new ball game.
Exactly. So you have to try and find what you can sustain in terms of a healthy lifestyle, and what will work for you in the long run, because it has to be a long-term process. It's not going to be a short-term process. So really looking at it as a long-term process is also important. It should not be that you want to lose weight for, say, a particular party or your wedding or whatever. So that's important to understand, that it's going to be a lifelong process.
Well, a lot of people don't. want that. I mean, in the States, it's instant gratification. We both know that. You
Yeah.
understand exactly what I'm saying. So they go on these diets where it's promised you're going to lose 17 inches in 1 month or 23 pounds. Maybe if you're 5 or maybe 7 years old. Men don't have the additional fat that women have because they bear kids, which seems to is never brought up. We're just built differently. And yet, when I meet people tell me they're going on these diets and this patch is going to do ABC, and I say, okay, well, I'll give it a try. But I know already ahead of time it's not going to work for me because everybody has their system within them works on a different type of, I guess, timetable or scale
Yeah.
than other people. So, would you sensibly recommend that they add exercise? Would that include going to a gym and lifting weights or doing some of the other type of exercises that you do with machines? Or do you, some of the other folklore is if you walk briskly every single day, and of course, the newest fad, you have to walk your 8,000 steps. And I'm thinking to myself, it doesn't work that way, but these people get away with saying that as the authority for losing weight.
So, exercise, if you let's talk about purely about weight loss. When you talk purely about weight loss, exercise is not the best way to lose weight. Exercise, having said that, in the same breath, I want to say that exercise is critical for our health. So I don't want to undermine exercise, but I also don't want to say that just exercise is going to help you. You cannot outrun a bad diet. That is for sure. So weight loss starts with changing your diet first. And then the second part, exercise. And when we talk about exercise, we usually just talk about either going to the gym or spending about half an hour, 1 hour a day doing some kind of a repetitive physical activity. But it's important to understand that most of the day we're not doing that exercise. And most of the day, if we're going to be sitting or being sedentary, that's not helpful either. So you have to be physically active, which means whether you're exercising or not exercising, you still need to be physically active. So, for example, if you're sitting in an office, try to get up and walk around every 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so. Try to take the stairs. Now, that is not exercise, that's physical activity that you're increasing in your day. And say park the car a little further away from your office so that you can take those extra few steps to get there. Avoid the elevator, stuff like that. As far as exercise goes, yes, it's very very important that you should exercise. For good health, it's recommended that you do 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity, and that's for good health. That's not for weight loss. So we know that for weight loss, actually not for weight loss, for maintenance of the lost weight to prevent the regain, you need a lot more exercise than just 150 minutes a week. And that's why it's important to understand that it starts with the diet. Exercise has a lot of immense benefits, but that you just cannot outrun a bad diet. It just doesn't happen.
So, what do you consider now? This is for the normal person. I'm not talking about, ladies and gentlemen, if you're on a special diet or you have diabetes, so you have to watch out for your sugar, or I have high triglycerides. It rampages in my household, for example, through generations. So I have to watch out for high cholesterol items, and I do. But outside, if you're a healthy, normal, whatever normal is, person, what is considered a healthy diet?
So a healthy diet would be a whole food diet. Now, it can be a whole food plant-based diet. It can be any whole food diet. Basically, food that you recognize as real food. There's a common thing that we say that you should eat what your grandparents would have eaten or your great grandparents would have eaten because that was real food. We didn't have this ultra processed food like we have now. And it's interesting, I had a guest on my show who basically called them food like products. And I was laughing at that time because it is so true. These are not real foods. These are not things that you will add to your food when you cook them at home. They do not have any semblance to the food that's actual food. And so it's important to understand these packaged foods. Try to stay away from them as much as possible and eat whole foods, basically. Vegetables, fruits, meats. If you have meats, that's fine. But try to stick to a diet that has more whole foods than these processed foods. Now, every food is going to be processed because when you start cooking, that's processing a food technically.
That's right.
So
Let's
it's
get it raw.
but what I mean by the process is the ultra processed foods. That means
Yes.
they've lost their original shape and form. So, for example, you're eating chips. They're you do not find chips in nature. So you have to, yeah,
You can make them at home. They're very easy to do. If you really want to, it's just a drying out process in the oven.
right, right,
Anything else. But you think about why they were dried in the first place. They were for the people who were going to be in the trail for a long time, cowboys, or people who were the trappers,
right.
who really weren't going to be using a lot of fires for various and sundry reasons. So they wanted something that was easy to put. I mean, think about how sourdough came to be invented. And it was invented so they can carry it in a leather pouch
Yeah.
around with them to use as a starter. I
Well,
mean,
and
that's
the other thing that I say
from
is,
yogurt.
yeah, and then the other thing that I say is that it's easy to look at these things in isolation. I think it's important to look at the diet as a whole and the food product as a whole. I think that's very important because you may say, well, I'm eating chips because it was eaten in by cowboys or whatever, but then you're just
Best
ignoring what
way,
else they were eating.
yeah, and this is how they measure food. For men, it's 2 palms. For a woman, listen up, it's 1 palm. So I hold my palm over the meat or chicken or fish, and I hold my palm over it, and I cut it to accommodate the palm. And I don't eat any more than that. And you're thinking, really? You do that? But what I remember going out before my husband passed, and we would go to a steakhouse, guys would sit down to an 18-ounce steak and eat the whole thing, marbled and all. And I'm going, I can't imagine what their gut must be saying at the moment. You don't understand. That's a lot of protein. And unless you're going out to brand cattle or ride on the trail for 10 to 15 hours on a horseback, a sedentary man doesn't need 18 ounces worth of 3-inch thick steak.
True.
I know, I have a lot of people looking appalled at me when I say things like that, but our portions have gotten larger over the
They
years.
have,
That
and
is
that
smaller.
definitely is contributing. Yep.
And that is not helping. I mean, I've seen when you hear quarter pounder for hamburgers, and you're seeing these kids and wolfing it down with cheese and bacon, or it's partially fried with cheese and bacon and all the trimmings, and then they have French fries with some kind of mayonnaise-based sauce. I homesteaded. I lived off the land for a long time. I did everything from scratch, folks. I know what goes into these products.
Yeah, it's important to understand because a lot of times they will have these additives. And the other thing is, whenever they try to sell a product, remember there's an economic incentive behind it. So they have to make it more palatable. And that's where this whole concept of hyperpalatable food comes in to kind of satiate or not to satisfy your cravings. And once the food becomes hyperpalatable, we know that certain things that make the foods hyperpalatable have an addictive potential. For example, sugar. And there have been studies done on this that on in mice that suggest that sugar may be actually more addictive than cocaine. So it's important to understand that the stuff that goes into what you're eating outside is not going to be the same as what you make at home.
Well, that's it. Or fat. Fat and
Yeah,
sugar, besides
absolutely.
chocolate, of course, but we'll leave that for next. Fat and sugar is the basis for a lot of the diets. If you look at
Yeah.
them very closely, that's what they're using. So and the only reason why some of these diets work is because they control your portion, folks. They don't expect you to have 5 protein bars or these protein drinks that are 35, 40 grams of protein. Those are great for athletes and even for moms who multitask. And I've done that. You're running around trying to catch your kids on a daily basis. You need the extra protein. But outside of that, you don't need 42 grams of protein if you're sitting on your ass all day. Think about it. I mean, these foods were developed for instant consumption or for sticking around for 5 to 10 years. Do you really want to eat cereal that's been on the shelf for 5 years because it's been processed that way?
That's true, Lily. And actually, interestingly, that we're talking about these processed and ultra processed foods. I would, however, want to add a caveat to these ultra processed foods. Sometimes we have these things called meal replacements that are available now. They are high protein, and the reason why they have high protein is because protein is satiating. So a lot of times, people with obesity can use actually meal replacements, even though they're ultra processed. They're not like the original forms, but because they add simplicity to the whole lifestyle and to the diet. So there is actually data to support the use of meal replacements for weight loss. Sometimes these things may actually be helpful, but as far as the ultra processed cereals and whatever go, I agree with you. I think they have lost their original form, and I am sort of opposed to using these cereals unless they are specific meal replacements. So they can be meal replacement shakes, meal replacement soups, whatever, and those are scientifically proven to actually help with weight loss.
Absolutely. And I just do want to interject one other thing, folks. When you're eating some fruits, please consider their sugar content. A lot of these fruits are full of sugar. And if you eat them dried, it just means the water or the liquid has been taken out of them. So all that's left is the fruit with its leathery and the sugar. So check how much sugar you're putting into your kid. If you're giving them raisins, check the sugar content of the raisins. It will shock you. Grape juice, full of sugar.
Well,
Apple
juice
juice.
is completely sugar, so juice is a big no for me.
Yes,
Um,
juice is a big no-no, but you'd be surprised of how many kids are given juice instead of soda because the parents think they're doing it a better thing. Stay away from grape. It's concentrated sugar. Apple juice, concentrated sugar. I mean, when you see 42, 52 grams of sugar in something, you should understand that you're drinking liquid sugar. I used to get appalled by people who went down to the islands and ate pure cane sugar. And then they couldn't understand when they came home with a mouthful of cavities. Because you're eating pure sugar, folks. That's why you're careful with honey. Honey is concentrated sugar.
right.
Maple syrup is concentrated sugar. You have to melt it down to get a lot for it, but it's pure sugar. It's the sap that runs in the tree. The sugar is the nutrient for the tree. Common sense. But I think it's important that we discuss this because, especially right now during the pandemic, that's all I hear around me is people putting on a lot of extra weight because our society feeds ourselves because we're upset, because we're isolated, because it's a comfort to eat it. Where 100 years ago, with our great great grandparents, they had to prepare and fix it before they had anything to eat. They did not have refrigerators. They put things in rivers or springs or dug a hole in the earth and put it in there to keep it cold. But as we grew technologically, we started developing machines that would take care of providing cold
You're right.
I lived off the land for a long time. We didn't have any electricity. We didn't have any indoor plumbing. We didn't have anything that I was brought up in a modern 20th century home. And the first year was the roughest. But after that, I really appreciated what we were doing because you had to initiate an action, as they say, before you could produce a meal. That's why
Right.
meals took such a long time to prepare. So if you wanted chicken for dinner, folks, you went out and you killed your chicken, you feathered it, you took all the innards out, you washed it, and then you started preparing it to eat. My mother used to tell me they would go out and buy fish, fill the bathtub up with water, and put the fresh catch of the day in the bathtub until it was ready to kill and eat it for supper.
Wow.
And this is in the 20th century. So it just depends how you're brought up and your attitudes toward food, which is going to either have the food is going to have an attitude towards you.
Right. And I think, food should be a celebration, and because it's an integral part of every culture that wherever you go, no matter where you go. So food should be a celebration, but I think these packaged and hyperpalatable foods are kind of taking that celebration part out of it, because really whenever there is, if you look at any community, whenever there is a community involved in preparing something or preparing a meal, there's a lot of socialization that's occurring, and that's such an integral part of any feast, right? So I think that's very important. But these packaged hyperpalatable foods, they take that out of the whole equation. I know our lives are much more busy than they've ever been, and I'm glad that there are a lot of services that are now available that are going to be giving you these pre-prepared meals, which are fairly decent. Some of them are really good, but or they'll give you a set portion of the raw products and with the recipe to prepare it. So that's really good too, because you're really getting stuff simplified for you. So it's become less intimidating. So the barrier of entry for cooking is also less. But I think I am a very strong proponent of cooking at home. I myself do a lot of cooking. So I'm a very strong proponent of meal prep at home and, cooking at home.
We have run out of time, Avishkar. So I'm going to ask you to tell everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web, where they can go listen to your podcast, and any other helpful information you wish to share with them.
Great. So they can find me. My website is www.decodingobesity.com. My podcast is called Decoding Obesity, and it's available everywhere that you can listen to. It's available on Apple, iTunes, Google, Spotify, wherever you want to listen to it. So it's called Decoding Obesity. Another exciting thing that I've just recently started, and it's still developing, is I've started a free Facebook community called Decoding Obesity Community. And it's really, the reason why I started this was because a lot of times people with obesity can find themselves alone. And it can be a lonely path, but it's important to understand there are so many of us who've been suffering from obesity or who've suffered from obesity too. So I started this to kind of form an accountability community where we can pull each other up and find the success that we need in the weight loss journey. So it's called Decoding Obesity. Again, you can just head to my website www.decodingobesity.com and you can find it over there.
Terrific. And ladies and gentlemen and adults of all ages, before we go away, I'm going to leave you with this thought, and it's from John Norris and from 1691. There are infinitely more ideas impressed on our minds than we can possibly attend to or perceive. So take what you've learned today about obesity and think it over wisely before you do anything. And also always talk to your doctor first. We want to thank you very much for joining us today. You can listen to this interview all over again on Facebook Live /Passional World Radio, on youtube.com/PWR Network _PW Talk Radio. You can also find it on twitter.com/PWR Network. And you can find it on https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, when you feel hungry, you may not really be hungry. So reach for a glass of water. I know you thought I was going to say something else, but I don't drink alcohol. Sorry. So reach for a glass of water. And if you want to make it taste a little bit fruity, put in a piece of pineapple or watermelon or a grape, just one, please. And you'll be surprised that some of the flavor from the fruit does leach out into the water. There's a scientific principle. I have no idea what it is, but I'm pretty sure you can look it up on Google. Google's really good that way. So thank you very much for listening, and please remember to come and join us next time.